Have you ever been so parched, so dry of mouth and throat that you were desperate for water? So happens I am at the moment. Actually, I've only had that happen once in my life when I was truly desperate for water. And that was when I was in Africa. I was there for a meeting, part of the diocese that I'd become joined with, and I was the only non-American there. You think that our services get a bit long here. Let me tell you, you know nothing. In Africa, everything is long. And this meeting lasted from 7 in the morning till past 7 in the evening. More than 12 hours of listening to priests and bishops go on and on and on. And I got fed breakfast, potatoes and bread. I got fed lunch, potatoes and bread. And the only beverage available during the whole day was water that had some kind of powder mixed in with it. Well, an American cannot drink that water. It's full of parasites. It doesn't affect them because their bodies are used to it, but we can't touch it. So for 12 hours, I had nothing to drink, bread and potatoes and nothing to drink. And let me tell you, by the time we got to those last 3 hours, I wasn't hearing anything that was said, you know? I mean, I'm dizzy-headed, I feel sick, all I can think is water, water, water. But there is a thirst for something other than water that is greater and more dangerous. And that is the thirst for spiritual water. A thirst for meaning and depth in life. So we have Jesus, who has, in this morning's gospel reading, has been in Jerusalem for a while. He's had to deal with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and constant challenge and conflict, and it seems he is tired and ready to go home, which means he's going to be going from Jerusalem back up to Galilee. And you remember there's this land called Samaria between Judea and Galilee. And normally, Jews would not walk through Samaria. They walked around Samaria because they hated the Samaritans. Hated them. The Jews believed that when the resurrection of the dead finally comes at the end of time, the Samaritans would have no part in it because they will be utterly destroyed by God. Despised them. You remember the Samaritans, in the eyes of the Jewish, were half-breeds. Half-breeds. They were the leftover Jews. After the northern kingdom was destroyed and then the southern kingdom was destroyed, they were the leftovers. You know, the poorest of the poor, the do-nothings who were left hanging out there. And what they do, well, they intermarried with pagan women. And so you've got this mix that has gone on there. They lost their racial purity, which was important because you remember all of Judaism is being destroyed and there's just one little group over in Babylonia and they're like, oh my gosh, we're it. It's just up to us to make sure this business with the God Yahweh is not lost in the world. And so racial purity was really important to them. Getting it right with this second opportunity was really important. So when they come back from Babylonia to rebuild the temple, they don't want anything to do with these faithless Samaritans. They don't want their people getting mixed in with these people who have made terrible pagan alliances. So the Samaritans said, well, good, we don't want anything to do with you either. So we're going to go over here to Mount Gerizim and we're going to build our own temple. And they do. And the hatred grew. So much so that if a Jewish child married a Samaritan, they were considered dead. They actually had a funeral for them. They are dead. Nothing to do with them ever again. And if for some reason a Jew had to pass through the land of the Samaritans, as soon as they got to the other side, you know what they did? They literally kicked the dust, that pagan dust, from their shoes. Nasty place. Don't want anything to do with it. Sorry I had to pass through it. But Jesus was tired. And walking around Samaria was a much bigger effort than walking through it, so he and the disciples walked through it. And by the time they're approaching Sychar, which is next to Shechem, which you studied in the Old Testament, you know, the original capital of Samaria, not far from Mount Gerizim, as soon as they're approaching that, Jesus, he is really worn out and like, I need to sit down. Well, Jacob's well is there. It's historically important to the Jews, a good place to sit for a bit. So they leave him sitting. They go into Sychar to get food and bring it back to him. And while he's sitting there alone, a Samaritan woman comes to draw water. Now, this is an odd thing, because clearly she has walked out to the outskirts of town to use a well when there are good wells in town. Why would she do that? Secondly, she comes at the wrong time of day. She comes at noon, and she comes alone. That's just not what was done. Women went first thing in the morning together as a group to get their water for the day. And they enjoyed conversation with one another as they drew the water. But as we read along, we discover why this is the case, most probably. That this woman was no doubt ostracized by the women of the village. She was considered what we might call po white trash, right? She was trash. So they wanted nothing to do with her, and she had to walk outside of the city and at noon rather than in the morning to avoid the village women. So she gets to the well, and this shocking thing happens. There's a Jewish man, a rabbi, sitting there, and he asks her for water. Now, Jewish men generally did not speak to women in public. I mean, it's a patriarchal culture. They had this idea, women are going to lure you in with their sexy looks, and, you don't look at them, you don't engage them out in public, you keep your mind focused on the Torah. And especially if you're a rabbi, you don't speak to any female out in public. Even if you see your own wife or your own daughter in public, you do not speak to them in public. You just don't do that. So rabbis especially didn't speak to women in public. But this woman is more than just a woman who's alone, a single woman alone. It's also a Samaritan. A Samaritan. A Jewish man by himself who is a rabbi would never speak to a woman by herself who is a Samaritan. But I don't know, have you noticed about Jesus? You may have noticed about Jesus when you're reading about his life that he considers no one unworthy. No one is unworthy to him. He embraces all. He gives his attention to all. He shows love and care no matter what. No matter the gender, the nationality, the religion, the station in life, it doesn't matter. Women, children, lepers, demoniacs, Samaritans, Roman soldiers, tax collectors, Syrophoenician pagans, Republicans, Democrats, Iranians, Russians, you get the picture. Anybody and everybody, all matter to him. He cares more about people than he does social or religious conventions. So without hesitation, he asks this single Samaritan woman for a cup of water. And she is shocked. She says to Jesus, wait a minute now. How is it that you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink? And I imagine her kind of looking from side to side to make sure nobody's witnessing this, because this is inappropriate and it's awkward. But Jesus isn't satisfied with that. He wants more than water. So he carries the conversation further to a next level, and he engages a woman in theological debate. I mean, let me tell you, that would never have happened in that day, that a rabbi was going to engage a woman, recognize a woman, to have theological debate. Could we say that Jesus was a feminist? I have no doubt about it. Let me tell you, look at the many ways that he honors, protects, and engages women throughout his ministry in a way that was completely contrary to the social and religious norms of the time. So he starts this theological conversation by saying, if you understood the generosity of God, and if you knew who I am, you'd be asking me, and I would give you this fresh, living water. Well, this woman, unfortunately, seems to be a literalist, like so many religious people. Jesus tells the disciples, you remember, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And they think he's talking about buying bread. He tells Nicodemus that he needs to be born again. And he thinks Jesus means he's got to crawl back into his mother's womb. The woman here says, Jesus says, I can provide you with living water. And she says, well, you don't even have a bucket. What are you talking about? So often when it comes to religion, metaphor and simile have more import than literalism because they take us to a much deeper level of meaning. And Jesus, I imagine, shakes his head and said, no, the water I'm talking about would so deeply quench your thirst that you would never be thirsty again. And still the literalist, she says, well, hot dog, tell me where I can get that so I don't have to come back to this doggone well. At this point, the conversation's going on too long. It's become too deep for propriety. So Jesus thinks perhaps another man needs to be here with us for this conversation. He says, how about go get your husband and bring him back and we'll continue to talk. And she says, well, I don't have a husband. And this is where there's a major turn in the conversation. Jesus says, I know that, but I also know that you've been married to 5 different men, and that now the man you're with is not your husband. Is the woman embarrassed by this? Maybe, but from the language of the text, it seems that she's more perturbed than embarrassed, that she's caught off guard. And she says to him, oh, so you're a prophet, are you? And then she enters into further theological conversation. She says, well, tell me this then. Why do we, the Samaritans, worship God at Mount Gerizim, but you Jews think you can only worship God in Jerusalem? She seems a little miffed. But Jesus isn't interested in getting caught up in a squabble about who's worshiping in the right way. Nor is he, and I hope you've noticed this all the way through that story, nor is he there to judge her or condemn her or embarrass her. Jesus, by the Spirit of God, has seen into this woman's soul, and he knows her suffering. He knows her yearning. Jesus had that kind of spiritual insight, didn't he? It allowed him to see beyond people's circumstances. I think about that crippled man. Do you remember the one who was at the pool in Bethesda, who had been sitting there for 38 years without ever making it into the water for healing? And what did Jesus do? He comes up to him. He looks at him, I think looking deeply into his soul, realizing that there's an issue here. And he says to him, do you really want to be healed? You've been sitting here for 38 years and you hadn't made it into the water. Are you really wanting healing? Because there's no point in me trying to give you healing if you don't want it. He's looking deeper. It's like that man, the son, that come down from the Mount of Transfiguration in Mark's Gospel, and this man comes up with his son who's having seizures and he needs healing. And Jesus seems to see something with him too. And he says, do you really believe that I can heal your son? And you remember the man says, I do believe, but help my unbelief. It seems that Jesus saw that maybe there was unbelief there that needed to be confessed so that he could help him. The rich young ruler, fastidious in keeping Moses' law, but Jesus could see deeper and could see that this young man was so deeply invested emotionally in his wealth that he couldn't find the fulfillment that he was really after. And do you remember that man that the friends brought him to Jesus for healing? He was a cripple. And Jesus saw that man needed something more than physical healing. He needed forgiveness. Jesus sees deeper than the outward circumstances. So what does he see in this woman? I think he sees a yearning for something that she's never found. He sees someone who has tried 5 times to find happiness in marriage and never found it. And even now, with another man, she is searching for the same happiness in the same way. Perhaps this woman is just looking to be understood and respected and loved. Maybe she wants a life of depth and peace and joy and completeness that she just can't find. I think Jesus sees that yearning in this woman. He knows all about her incompleteness and emptiness, the suffering of her soul, the hurt and the frustration she feels by never being able to find what she thinks she most needs. Could it be that this woman, through all these years, through all of those marriages, was looking for something that marriage would never give her? What's that old country song? Looking for love in all the wrong places? Looking for love in too many faces? Searching their eyes, looking for traces of what I'm dreaming of? There's a sadness in that, isn't there? Do you ever feel that sense of completeness and contentment for which you yearn is never fully satisfied? Perhaps you've yearned for something, you've hoped for it, you've worked for it, you've prayed for it, and then you get it, and it's just not enough. It wasn't all that you'd imagined. This could be a career, a relationship, a car, a house, a vacation, something, some experience, maybe just life in general that never fills you up. You always walk away still thirsty for something more. C.S. Lewis, in his book Surprised by Joy, talks about having a feeling of inconsolable longing for something never actually experienced. He describes this ache as the scent of a flower we have never found, the echo of a tune we have never heard. In Mere Christianity, he writes, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Don't you love that? If I keep going around in this world, searching for, yearning for, wanting for something more than anything in this world can offer, then maybe I was created ultimately for another world. Have you ever had that experience, however fleeting, that you were yearning for something that you didn't know you were yearning for until you brushed up against it, and somehow it spoke, at least for a moment, to all those deep subconscious and unconscious desires within you? C.S. Lewis preached a great sermon on the radio in 1941, right there in the midst of the Second World War. It's called The Weight of Glory. And he talks about how we all have within us this yearning, this desire for spiritual feeding, and that we get so covered up with all the harsh realities of the world. They were in the midst of the Second World War, the Blitz. We get so covered over by all the harsh realities of the world and all the desires and attractions of this physical life that we lose touch with that thing. We become numb to it, except that we keep having this feeling of yearning for something more, something greater, something better, something deeper. Lewis calls it a secret desire. He says this secret desire we cannot hide and we cannot recognize. He says we cannot recognize it because it's a desire for something that we've never actually fully experienced in this world. But we can't hide it because our experiences in this world keep constantly suggesting it and pointing toward it. He says this, the books and the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust them too much. It is not in them, it only comes through them as longing. These things are good images of what we really desire, but if we mistake them for the thing itself, then they become dumb idols. In other words, he's saying when we read some wonderful book or we hear some wonderful music, that's a great thing. They're opening up in us this longing, this spiritual yearning and desire, but don't think that it's contained within them. The beauty there is great and wonderful, but what you're really after is not going to be fulfilled in those things. Those things are only leading you to the bigger reality. Clinton Manley, in an article last year about desiring God, talks about it in this way. He says, you know that feeling? You can read an incredible story, and sometimes it ignites inside you this excitement and wonder. you don't want to let it go. It's a stabbing of an ache for something you can't quite say what it is. I don't know about you. There have been books I've read, and I've become so much a part of the world in that book and of the people's lives in that book that when I'm getting to the near the end of it, I'm thinking, oh no, I don't want this to end. No. And I want to go back and reread it and recapture all of that again. He's talking about that. He says, or the beauty, the wonder of listening to a song that leaves you forever changed. Do you know songs like that are still with you, that touched you so deeply? He said it's as though your soul has become the instrument on which the song was played. Or he said the beauty of a winter landscape that sweeps through you and calls to life something that you didn't know even existed within you. And you try to go back to these feelings. You try to return again and again to that moment to capture the feeling, and you can't do it. Why can't you do it? Because he says, like Lewis, these good things, these beautiful things are only the messengers and not the thing itself. He says this, I love this. I thought I desired 1,000 different things, but now I realize I only desire the one thing, and the 1,000 different things keep drawing me toward that one thing, God. I think that this is not only what that woman at the well was searching for as she continued to marry one man after another. I think it is true for every person that Jesus meets along the way and every parable he tells, whether it's the rich young ruler, the prodigal son, the Syrophoenician woman, Nicodemus coming to him in the night, Zacchaeus climbing up the tree, the disciples, even the Pharisees. In fact, I think it is true for all of humanity that we yearn, we thirst, like people lost in a desert. We thirst for something more than ourselves, more than this world, more than all the beautiful things that nature and human creativity can make. But Jesus is telling us that that yearning cannot be fulfilled by this physical world. It can only be filled by spiritual things. And he offers us what he offers the woman at the well, living water. A source of joy and fulfillment, of hope and contentment that comes spilling forth like the great waterfall from the heart of God. The very Spirit of God dwelling within us with such fullness, with such impenetrable depth, that we are never parched. We never thirst, even as we walk through the most barren deserts of our lives. Imagine what that might be like. Filled so deeply from the very heart of God with this peace and joy and contentment springing forth from within us, so that no matter what we face in the desert of this world, we are full of life.